And one illness, I know Delisa will not be joining us today. She is not feeling well. Okay. So a few things that I want to mention as we get started. First off, my name is Diane Todd Sprague. I'm the Executive Director of Financial Aid at the University of Texas at Austin, and I am serving as chair this year for the Financial Aid Advisory Committee. So welcome, everyone. Great to see all these lovely smiling faces. What we're going to do is go around and introduce ourselves and then allow the folk on the phone to let us know who is dialed in. So I've started. I will then pass it on to Robert.
Robert Marino, Dean of Financial Aid at San Jacinto College.
Carla Flores, Senior Associate Director at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley.
Alan Pixley, Director of Financial Aid and Veteran Services at Collin College.
I'm Selma DeLeon, Executive Director of University of North Texas, and I'm also the past chair of the committee.
Okay, Karen? Okay, and Karen, I was going to make this announcement. I'll let you know. You need to turn your mic on anytime that you talk so that the people that are listening via web and phone can hear who's saying what, okay?
Terry Shedeman, Fort Bend ISD.
Wow.
Brent Williford, Dean, Financial Aid, Scholarships, Veteran Services, Blinn College.
Samantha Stoniker, District Director, Tarrant County College.
Jonathan Cedicetis, Student Representative from the University of Texas at El Paso.
Ed Cressley, Director of Financial Aid, Angelo State University.
Denise Welch, Director of Financial Aid, Panola College.
Heidi? Oh. Sure. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and Heidi Granger, and Student Financial Services, Assistant Vice President from El Paso, UT.
And I was going to announce that Chad will be late, but Chad is here. So Chad Pulse will be at the table in just 1 second. Do remind everyone that if you have cell phones on, if you have cell phones with you, please silence them. Anytime that you speak, talk in the mic. Also wanted to let you know that you should have in your packets the member expense report form. If you would fill that out today and turn that in, that would be great. We do have a number of people, myself included, that have not done it for December, and that's needed also. So for those of us who haven't done it yet, if you ever, please turn that in as soon as possible. If you have to step out of the room, feel free to do that at any point in time. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to have the phone people introduce themselves. I do apologize. Paul and anyone else?
This is Paul Gallion at Jacksonville College, Jacksonville, Texas.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you, Paul. I apologize.
That's not a problem.
Okay. We did start something in the past. We've had a little bit of trouble in the past making sure that we know when someone wants to speak. So do wave, make some motions so that we know that you want to speak. For folk that were on the table last time, Karen, if you want to just turn your name tag up, that would be an indication that you have something to say, just so we make sure we get comments when we need them. Okay. So now that we've gone through the welcome, introductions, and overview, item B would be consideration of approval of minutes from the meeting held December 6th. Does anyone have any comments or corrections to the minutes? Hey, go ahead.
I have some very minor edits on page 5. Under the update, Lisa's name is misspelled. Up at the top. And then also under agenda item K.
Selma, could you repeat that one?
Oh, up at the top where the box says update, committee chair stated that Delisa Fox.
Oh.
Delisa's misspelled. And then also under agenda item K, bullet, I think it's 1, 2, 3. At the end of that sentence, it should say about the new priority. Right now it says A.
Instead of any. Got it. Thank you. Any other comments or corrections? Okay, hearing none, could we have a motion to accept?
Motion to accept.
Thank you. Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. Thank you so much.
Hey, Diane, Marilyn is also on the phone.
Oh,
and
okay.
She just couldn't talk, but now she's getting connected on the phone.
I approve.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Okay, awesome. So Marilyn will be joining us on phone as well. Okay. Item number 3 is selection of vice chair. This is something that should have happened last meeting, but we did not have it on the agenda, so we moved it to this meeting. I would like to start this process. Okay, I'm sorry, who's on?
Marilyn.
Hey, Marilyn. Glad you can join us. So we're in the process of starting nominations for vice chair. I'm sorry, Megan?
Item number 3 is selection of vice chair. This is something that should have happened last meeting, but we did not have it on the agenda, so we moved it to this meeting.
Marilyn or Paul, if you would put your phones on mute, we're getting feedback from you watching the broadcast.
Marilyn. Hey, Marilyn. Hi. Glad you can join us. Thank you. So we're in the process of starting nominations for vice chair. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Megan. Item number 3. Hello? Hello?
Okay, we can hear you. Just please keep your phone on mute so that we don't get feedback from your watching the broadcast online. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good to know we're on a delay. I had no idea. Okay.
Quite live.
Just in case. So on the selection of vice chair, I would like to start the process by nominating Robert Marino from San Jacinto Community College. Is there any other nominations that we might have from the floor?
I would like to second.
Okay. So we have a motion and we have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Robert, congratulations and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you
Is this sort of a voluntold thing? Yeah. Okay.
Congratulations.
Item D, oh, and I'm sorry, I did forget one other thing when we were talking. As we go along today, we'll make a decision later as we see how the meeting is flowing as to whether or not we'll take a break for lunch. If we manage to get through everything quickly, we might just extend and work through, but that'll be a decision that the group meets later on. Okay. Item 3, D, rather, not 3.
There's actually no prior business to be discussed based on a review of the minutes.
Item E, we have a presentation from Trellis. Carla Fletcher is going to review their state report with us.
Okay, does that work? Oh, here we go. Hi. Good morning, everybody. Oh, thank you. My name is Carla Fletcher. I'm a senior research analyst at Trellis Company in the research department. And thank you for letting me come here today to tell you about our report. It's called The State of Student Aid and Higher Education in Texas. We call it SOSA for short at Trellis. It's a reference publication, and we update it roughly annually. And I'd like to give you a brief overview on how the report is laid out and then demonstrate how it could be used. There we go. Okay. So it currently contains 13 sections, and these are the section headers listed there. The report covers a variety of topics related to higher education. It starts with demographics, looking at things like race, ethnicity, projections, and poverty rates. It then moves to some pre-college topics, and then into college, describing college students and how they pay for school. After a section about college attainment, we look at student financial wellness and programs aimed at improving retention. And following that are sections on consumer debt and loan repayment outcomes, and then a section taking a broader look at statewide higher education and student debt policies. So the SOSA focuses on Texas, but we sometimes compare also with other states or with the nation wherever possible. Sometimes pages are just national only. It just depends on the data sources that we're using. So as I mentioned, it's intended to be a reference document, so it's designed to give you a quick stat on a topic of interest, so you don't have to read all 13 sections sequentially in order to get the information that you need. The pages are designed to stand on their own. Each page gives you a headline, a graphic, a brief summary text, and then sources at the bottom. And there's one of the table of contents pages. You can see how, well, you probably can't see it all that well, but it has the header of the section and then each page title within the section. So you can just scan through the table of contents to find the topic of interest and then go straight to that page and look right at it. So now I'm going to go through kind of three narratives that you could look at putting different pages together within the SOSA. So the first one, what we'll take a look at, is Texas demographics and the importance of the education of the Hispanic population to the future of Texas. So as we all know, education is very valuable. Every state in the nation has had compulsory schooling laws in place for at least 100 years. Completing high school has been an important step towards a brighter future for decades. However, as of 2016, 37% of Hispanics in Texas aged 25 and older did not have a high school diploma, compared to 12% of African Americans and 7% of whites. And looking at high school graduates, we can see a gap in immediate college enrollment between different race and ethnicity groups. The percentage of white high school graduates who enroll in college the following fall still exceeds the percentage of non-white enrollees. However, this gap is closing. There was a 19 percentage point gap between white students and Hispanic students in 2002, which shrank to 7 percentage points by 2017. This was due both to rising enrollment rates among Hispanic students and falling enrollment rates among white students. So it's not the most ideal way to close the gaps, as you know. We would prefer that everyone would be rising. You can see a similar trend in comparing African American students to white students as well. Enrolling in college immediately following high school graduation is important because delaying post-secondary enrollment after high school graduation is a risk factor for eventually dropping out of college or never enrolling at all. And earning a college degree is becoming more and more important to the ability to obtain good jobs with good salaries. By 2020, approximately 54% of jobs in Texas and 65% of jobs nationally will require some kind of formal training or education beyond high school. For employees without any post-secondary education, most job openings by 2020 will come from the food service, personal service, and blue-collar occupations such as construction, production, and transportation. Openings that generally require post-secondary education will be more in sales and office support, healthcare, education, and managerial roles. So now I wanted to take a look at poverty just a little bit. Texas had the 14th highest poverty rate in the nation, with 15.6% of Texans living in poverty in 2016. In that year, poverty was defined as having an annual income of $24,339 for a family of 4 with 2 children, or $12,486 or less for an individual under 65 years old. But poverty rates in Texas vary widely by region. By a large margin, the Rio Grande Valley region has the highest rates of overall and childhood poverty at 30% and 42% respectively, at least 11 percentage points higher than any other region. Not surprisingly, those with fewer resources are less likely to be able to afford college. That blue bar in both charts is the economically disadvantaged students, and the green is the non-economically disadvantaged. So it's true that poverty affects all of the racial ethnic groups in the charts. However, only 17% of white high school graduates in Texas are considered to be economically disadvantaged, while 64% of Hispanic and 57% of African American high school graduates are economically disadvantaged. So poverty is an issue that can affect anybody, obviously, but we can see that it disproportionately affects students of color in Texas. In the year 2050, 61% of children, 60% of 18 to 24-year-olds, and 56% of 25 to 44-year-olds are projected to be Hispanic. So increasingly, the future of Texas, including its economic prosperity, as well as the expertise needed to run business, government, and infrastructure, will depend on the education of its non-white populations, which, as we've seen, have historically had lower incomes, higher rates of poverty, and lower likelihood of attending and completing college compared to whites. Focusing on the educational success of Hispanic students in particular is important to the future of Texas. So next, in the second block here, we'll look at paying for a university education in Texas. So this chart shows the cost of attendance broken up into categories for both Texas and the US for 2 years for each. As we all know, the cost of attendance is more than just tuition and fees. It also includes books and supplies, food and housing, and other expenses. At the average public four-year university in Texas, tuition and fees are just 38% of a full-time undergraduate's total cost of attendance. Books and supplies make up 5% of the total, and the remaining 57% is the cost of living. And these costs are not discretionary. Students must eat, and unless they don't pay rent, they have to pay for their housing as well. The average cost of attendance for 2 semesters at a Texas university was $23,418 in the 2017-18 school year. And most students, of course, don't end up paying the full cost of attendance due to things like tuition discounting and grants and scholarships. The net price here from the Department of Education data is the cost of attendance minus all grants and scholarships. So that leaves the amount that the student must pay out of pocket or with loans. And as expected, the net price increases along with family income, as those with more resources are expected to be able to contribute more to their education. And it also reflects that needier students receive more need-based grant aid. So in the public four-year sector, students with the lowest incomes had a net price for 2 semesters of about $9,100, climbing to about $17,500 for those in the highest income quintile. So the cost of living amounts that we saw in the first slide are important because they are part of the equation that determines how much financial aid students are eligible to receive. If these estimates are set too low, students may not receive enough aid to reasonably afford food and housing while enrolled. Now, despite their best efforts, institutions may not always accurately estimate these costs. The chart in this slide shows the results from a 2013 study that compared institutionally set costs against federal estimates of average rent, utilities, and food by county. This is a national study that was done. About a third of all institutions nationwide had lower living cost estimates compared to federal estimates. And some students have dependents of their own to care for while enrolled. These students face particularly high living costs as they ideally need more space than just one person, and having children may make it more difficult to have roommates. In 2017, a student with one child living in a 2-bedroom apartment would have cost almost twice as much for food and housing compared to a student sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with a roommate. Okay, so now we can look at where aid comes from. 76% of student aid came from the federal government, and 60% of student financial aid at public universities in Texas was in the form of loans. So students at universities in Texas are highly dependent on loans and the federal government. The Pell Grant, of course, is another important source of aid for students in Texas and nationwide. The buying power of the federal Pell Grant has declined over the last 3 decades. Designed to be the foundation of need-based grant aid, only undergraduates with significant financial need receive this grant. In the 2017-18 academic year, the average Pell Grant in Texas covered only 19% of the average cost of attendance for 2 semesters at a Texas public university, and the same percentage in the public 2-year sector. While the average Pell Grant tends to increase from one year to the next, these increases have failed to keep pace with increases in the cost of college. Many students work while in school to pay for their school or living costs, or both. From 1966 to 1981, an undergraduate could have paid for the total cost of attendance for 2 semesters of education at a public university by working about 24 hours per week, every week of the year at a minimum wage job. So it was certainly possible to work one's way through school on a low-wage job at that time. In the 1980s, education costs began to climb, and minimum wage increases occurred less frequently. By 1989, the number of work hours needed to cover costs stood at 39 hours per week. As costs have continued to increase and the minimum wage has been fairly stagnant, the number of work hours needed to have, the number of work hours needed has increased sharply since the year 2000. Historically, cost of attendance tends to be a little lower in Texas compared to national averages, but even in Texas in 2017, 66 hours of work at minimum wage would be needed to cover the average cost of attendance for 2 semesters. Given the university costs and the available resources, many students have unmet need. In 2016, students attending a public 4-year institution in Texas with family incomes under $75,000 had more than $8,000 in unmet need on average for that school year. University costs continue to rise every year, outpacing available aid, leaving many students with thousands of dollars in unmet need. All right, so for the last section, I'm going to look at Texas community college sector and students. The community college sector is hugely important and vital across the U.S., but particularly in Texas. Nearly half of undergraduates in Texas attended public 2-year institutions in the fall of 2016, a far higher percentage than in the U.S. overall. In fact, more than 3/4 of all Texas freshmen in fall 2017 were enrolled at public 2-year schools. The student populations enrolled at public 2-year schools can look pretty different compared to their peers at 4-year institutions or at the for-profit schools. There are far more part-time students in the 2-year sector than in any other sector, and these students tend to be older compared to the 4-year sectors, although the proprietary sector looks even more different compared with age. Nearly 1/3 of public 2-year students were first generation, again, more compared to the 4-year sectors. Also, more than half of community college students took developmental education courses in the 2015-16 academic year, much more than in the other sectors. Many college students also struggle with food and housing issues. The top chart shows several recent studies of food security. The first 3 listed from left to right were done specifically with community college students. And the last one listed there is a measure of food security across all U.S. households, and it's just placed there for comparison purposes. You can see that about half of community college students in each of those 3 surveys experience low or very low food security. Low food security is defined by the USDA as reports of reduced quality, variety, or desirability of diet, and very low food security as reports of multiple indications of disrupted eating patterns and reduced food intake. The Trellis survey, which is one of those top 3, we also, as a part of that survey, looked at housing security. And so in that bottom chart, you can see the results from the Trellis survey on housing security. And it defines homelessness as being without a place to live, often residing in a shelter, an automobile, an abandoned building, or outside. And then housing security is less severe and includes things like an inability to pay full housing costs and moving in with others due to financial issues. So while none of these surveys are statistically representative of the entire U.S., in looking at them, you can start to get a picture of what it looks like among college students, and you can see that a large percentage of students responding to the Trellis survey indicated that they had had housing issues in the previous year. So Texas community college costs have historically been lower than national averages, but Texas has been catching up in recent years. The chart here, again, shows the total cost of attendance like we were looking at for the 4-year sector. Tuition and fees in the community college sector make up 21% of the total costs. Books and supplies about 9%, and then the remaining 70% is the cost of living. And again, most students, of course, don't end up paying the full cost of attendance. In the public 2-year sector, students with the lowest incomes had a net price for 2 semesters of about $5,800, climbing to about $11,000 for those in the highest income quintile. So even for students in this highest income quintile, the community college sector is more affordable than any other sector for students in any income, with few exceptions. Now, the data for this chart comes from the Department of Education and has its limitations because they look at first-time, full-time undergraduates. So at some of the community colleges, that's a pretty small percentage of the population. It's just something to keep in mind. Average unmet need decreases as income increases, which sounds logical, but also means that any need-based grant aid that low-income students are receiving doesn't seem to be making that much of a dent. And then also I don't have a slide on this, but many of the students in the community college sector are also parents and have dependents. That means that they'll have additional costs on top of what a typical student would have. Nearly all financial aid in the public tier sector comes from the federal government. As you can see in the top chart, 86%. And more than half of that aid is in the form of grants, 54% in that bottom chart. Even though many fewer students at community colleges borrow compared to universities, still about a third of all direct student aid in 2015-16 was in the form of loans. Obtaining at least some college education confers financial benefits upon the individual. So while there is a large boost at the bachelor's degree and beyond level in terms of earnings and unemployment rates, there are definite benefits to obtaining an associate's degree or even just some college. And I think that's the end of the demonstration. Okay, so I am the lead on this SOSA publication, and that's my contact information at the top, and my boss, Jeff Webster, the Director of Research, at the bottom. And follow us on Twitter at Trellis Research. This is a new release that we just put out in, I believe it was in January. And so something that I didn't include in the slides is we now have the report available in a mobile-friendly format, and it has a quick search feature, so it's a lot easier to use on a phone than it used to be. And the website is trelliscompany.org/state-of-student-aid-2019. I can say that slower if you guys would like, but I think that's all I have for you guys, and thank you so much for your time. I'm happy to take any questions.
So, Carla, thank you very much. This was very interesting. I have a question. Can you slice and dice the data that you have by institution?
It depends on what data it is.
Okay.
Sometimes we're getting more at the summary level for certain things, but so it would really just depend on what it was specifically.
Okay. I found it was really interesting, the information about the food insecurities and the housing insecurities. That's something that we've been focusing on our campus quite a bit. And what we're seeing is that there seems to be two levels. Some will be short-term, some will be longer-term, and we're trying to develop some pilot programs in response to both. So I thought that was helpful. Also, I was really fascinated by the slide that showed the amount of hours that would be used to finance, because that's something that I think we all recognize. You know, back in the day, for some of us, we knew that you could work for the summer and afford the whole year, and we knew that that is not possible any longer. But that's pretty startling to see the 66 hours.
Yes, yeah, and it's, you know, of course, it's at minimum wage covering a full complete cost of attendance, so it's like the maximum, you know, possible amount, but it just shows that, you know, it's really not possible for someone to work their part-time job and work their way through school, but it was possible. So people who are in the policymaking sphere may be thinking back to their situation and thinking about that, but not realizing that it's so different now than it used to be.
Do you all have the data on, say, you know, how many hours it would take in 1970, 1980, 1990?
We do, actually, yes. Yeah, many years ago, we had the chart that went back to the 60s. For the nation, we don't have it for Texas, but yes, we do have that available.
So I might get that from you and pass it out to everyone to have that as an even starker realization.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be super helpful, because you know, there's a lot of folk that we're dealing with at our institutions that are of a certain age that do think of it in terms of when they went to school, and it would be nice to have it maybe broken out by decade, and just say, okay, for those of you that were here in the 60s or 70s, yes, it was possible. Started sliding in the 80s, really tanked in the 90s and beyond. So
Yeah,
that would
definitely.
be great.
Yeah.
I have a question about the cost of attendance. What is the source that was used for the county cost of living estimates?
So is that the chart where it shows that a third?
Yes.
So I believe that that study was looking at cost of the institutional set cost of attendance from iPads, and then compared them to the Department of Housing and Urban Development costs for rent by county, and then food costs from the USDA.
I have a question and maybe two comments, or maybe a question for the group. First, your slide where you talked about unmet need. Could you define unmet need for the sake of this?
Sure, yes. So unmet need there was any need or cost of attendance minus all aid, and that included loans, grants, scholarships.
Includes work study, includes all loan eligibility, even parent loans, possibly?
I don't think parent loans are included in that.
They're offered, but loan, and a loan that is offered, not necessarily a loan that the student took?
I think it's loans student took.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, yeah. No. So my comment, or maybe kind of question for the group, you talked about this idea of an unrealistic cost of attendance, and then the need for some populations of students to possibly increase that to reflect the real costs that they have. What I find in the work that I do is that anytime we increase cost of attendance, it doesn't necessarily result in increased grant or gift aid assistance. It only results in more loans. And so just a comment, and is that consistent among most schools, I guess, and then just understanding that, recognizing the full cost of attendance is not necessarily addressing the issue of students' ability to pay for college and cover their full costs. It's, it's a lack of grant assistance to meet that need more than it is maybe cost of attendance. So.
Right, yeah, no, I agree with you. I think most of the issues are just lack of resources.
So I'll get off my soapbox now, but, and I think another thing, and just the angle of this, because I think that work, numbers of hours needing to work and is very powerful, especially in talking with parents who have the comment, well, I was able to do it. But I think another angle of that I've used and I think can be effective to students is to have them calculate the scholarship and grant assistance that they're getting, and then determine if they were to lose that because their scholarship doesn't renew or they don't make SAP, how much would they need to work to replace that? And that's, I think, an eye-opener for students, and I think it's something they can relate to say, hey, and then where I follow that with is, what's your main job while you're in school? Your main job is to be the student and be successful, because if you don't do that and you don't find the balance, you're working 40 hours a week to be able to go to school, but then you're losing your money, and so just another way to play with that idea of what does it cost, in work in order to pay for college.
Yeah.
There's a number that I'm trying to correlate here that I'm having trouble with. You have a graph of buying power of Pell, and it shows the average total cost of public 2-year, which looks to be about $22,000 based on where the graph is falling. It's on page 14 of our handout. And then at the bottom of page 19, it says that the average cost is $18,770. And so I'm just wondering what the $3,000 difference is in the average total cost between those two slides.
Let's see. Numbers are different. Page numbers are different. I don't know offhand. I'll mark that and
You
take a
could
look
look
at
at
that.
and just
Yeah.
let us know? So I was just trying to align all the graphs.
Yes, definitely.
On 19, it's looking specifically at community colleges, where I think on 14, it may be all schools.
Might be pulling in like the technical institutes and the Lamars. So,
All public
yeah,
institutions.
just seems to,
Universities as well.
Yeah, universities would be the bigger.
2-year though.
Oh.
Yeah, for the public 2-year. Well, if you could just look and let us know,
definitely.
that'd be great.
Yeah.
Actually, it would be the same for the 4 years.
Is it different also?
The 4-year on the Pell slide seems to be around 28K, and on the other side, it's lower than that. So it'd just be helpful to know what the numbers that were being used in both of those would be.
Yes, definitely. Take a look at that.
In your community college and for your public or private, how do you handle dual credit students in your data?
Well, it depends on how we get it. So, I mean, a lot of the information we get comes from the Department of Education. So, however, they do that in iPads, is how we get it. So I think they make those kinds of decisions. We get some of the information from you guys. So it just depends on how it's requested. We haven't specifically thought through how to deal with dual credit. So I guess we've kind of left that to the entities that do the data management and deal with the requests. But it does seem like it's a growing population. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. It seems like there's different ways that it could be handled. What would be the best way to handle that, do you think? Are they considered full-fledged college students to be included in things like enrollment and?
I think that's a great question.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, so that's a good point. Thank you.
I think in that area, it depends both on how the question's asked, but also how the question's answered, which is true with most data. But,
Yeah, that's true. Every data has its limitations and different ways of looking at it.
Any other comments or questions? Okay. Carla, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Okay, item F on our agenda, presentation on the proposed legislation regarding innovative textbook pricing agreements. Dominic Chavez from Pearson. Good morning, Dominic. The podium would be great if you could. Is that microphone on?
There it is now.
Okay. Jennifer?
Jennifer Hill with McGraw-Hill.
Good morning, Kevin Witt, Director of Business Development for John Wiley & Sons.
Okay.
And I'm Dominic Chavez with Pearson Education, but we're actually all here today on behalf of the American Association of Publishers. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to come talk to the committee about some of the work we're doing. And it's very timely, not only in the context, I think, of the presentation that you just had, but also in terms of the legislative session, some of the work that we're doing. So it's timely for us to come kind of update you on that. And again, as part of the outreach that we've been doing now for the better part of 2 years as an industry. In fact, it was about a year ago this week or last that we came and presented to the Learning Technology Advisory Committee here at the Coordinating Board to talk about some of this. It really deals with technology and innovation in terms of the delivery of digital instructional materials on campus. So I think just for a quick inventory, I think you should have a copy of the presentation in your packets. You should also have a copy of the legislation that has been filed by Representative Howard and, as of this morning, Senator Menendez from San Antonio. And a quick little one-pager copy on the Code of Federal Regulations. So those are just references for you as we kind of go through this conversation.
Dominic, just one quick thing for the folks in the audience. This was a recent handout you got on the table this morning. So it wasn't part of the original packet.
Correct.
Thank you.
That's right. Thank you for that. So what I'm going to do just real briefly, and then I'll share duties here with my colleagues, just a quick level set. So if we go to this is the slide, isn't it? There it is. Just a quick level set in terms of what the market looks like. So it was great that we just heard that presentation about the cost, for books and supplies, which I think range between $1,200 and $1,600, if my memory serves me. To be very, very clear, it doesn't matter to the student, as you well know, where that $1,200 or $600 is paying for, right? It's $1,200, right? It doesn't matter. But just for kind of contextualizing for our conversation, when you kind of break that out, there is a difference between what goes towards instructional materials, textbooks, et cetera, and things like computers or, printer paper or those sorts of things. So we just, just to kind of give you a context of that, we have seen, just in terms of instructional materials, a decline over time. Now, that isn't necessarily because things have gotten less expensive or that prices have been cut, because as you can see with the next slide, students just have a lot more choices, right? So I recall going back to my days in college, you either had the bookstore on campus or you had the bookstore off campus, and if you got there early enough, you could get a used textbook, and that was pretty much it. But as you know, students have Amazon. They have, they're very creative in how they find these materials. We also, in the industry, I'm sure my colleagues can relate, we also have problems where they'll find a version, an international version that maybe isn't as high quality, but they find it online somehow and it's cheaper. So they have a lot of choices, and that's part of what's causing the decline, in terms of spending on instructional materials. And again, you can see there from that bottom chart, again, where they're able to find these things. And then we also see, again, OER also plays into that, right? Open educational resources, as many of you are familiar with. 20% of students recently reported that they downloaded free materials. Now, whether that's good or bad, where they're getting it from, that's a whole other question, but that's part of the equation here. But as we say, not all choices are good. What we find is that a lot of students, because they are bargain shopping, because they're smart consumers, they're waiting longer to buy their instructional materials. So there's always that classic example of, well, I'm not going to buy my stuff until I get to the course and decide whether I like it or not. That's still, a common thread. But we also know in terms of prices, they're making determinations about, well, can I get away with not having to buy that, or can I find that later? Again, that's good for the standpoint of keeping costs low for the student, expenditures low, but it does have a consequence. And this is some recent survey data that shows, when students do this, they don't buy the materials, they end up dropping out of the course, they end up failing the course, and some other kind of unintended consequences and negative consequences for that. So what we're going to do today is briefly, just as a context, we're going to talk about something the industry is doing literally just within the last 2 years or so that we've really been, and it's commonly referred to in the industry as inclusive access, and it's kind of leveraging digital instructional materials, kind of transitioning from the old, for lack of a better word, the $300 chemistry textbook to a digital offering. And I kind of set this up by saying, look, what we're seeing in the publishing industry in higher education specifically, where most of this transition is happening, is really akin to what happened in the retail entertainment industry. If you'll recall Netflix, many years ago when they came up, you had Blockbuster. And Blockbuster was one of the most profitable retail entertainment companies in the world, if not one of the most profitable companies, period. They were on every corner. They'd be packed every weekend. People getting their DVDs, their VHSs, tapes. Netflix comes on board. And remember, I think when they started, I think we were still mostly on dial-up, right? Download speeds were slow. Quality was bad. Content not very robust. And also attitudes. People just didn't really think about, downloading and streamloading content. If you'll recall, Netflix almost went bankrupt a couple times, right? Blockbuster was thriving. But then there was an inflection point, right, where the technology, DSL came on, their content got better, their technology got better. We hit an inflection point in history. And it's amazing if you go back and look at it now, how quickly Blockbuster literally disappeared. It's gone. In fact, I think the last Blockbuster closed in Alaska. I don't even know how they were. I guess they were independent because the company's gone. That's kind of shocking. I mean, I have a 12-year-old who's never even heard of, he kind of remembers Blockbuster. But again, that kind of, I won't suggest that that's exactly what's going to happen in higher ed, but that's the kind of shift that we're having in the conversation, changing the business model so fundamentally. And the great thing about, in terms of the conversation we're having today, is it is to great benefit of students in terms of really shifting the cost of their instructional materials. Now, I do want to kind of level set before I turn it over that what we're offering here today and what we're talking about in terms of cost savings, let's be very, very clear. Again, as you saw in the slides, books and supplies only accounts for about 5, 6, 7% of total cost of attendance, right? So the savings that we're going to talk about and the things that we're able to do for students, let me be clear, we're not suggesting that suddenly like we have solved the student debt crisis, right? I wish we could, we can't. But hey, what you'll see is these are real dollars and they are meaningful, and you have all, given the roles that you played at your institutions, really appreciate this, and that's why we're here today to kind of brief you. So we'll kind of walk through this. Please interrupt us for questions, and then, I'll come back at the end and kind of, we'll take any questions or anything that we can be helpful with. So with that.
Can I see a show of hands? Who has heard of inclusive access? So I'm going to define it, and it basically is a digital course material delivery model, delivering materials on the first day of class at affordable rates. Now that's rather dry, so I'm going to give you the essence of what it really is. In my 23 years of publishing, it's the first time I've ever seen the institution, the bookstore, the faculty, and publishers come together to address affordability. So in essence, as the screen suggests, it's a partnership between the institution, the bookstore, the faculty, the publisher, to deliver affordable quality materials on the first day of class at or below market rates. So we're addressing affordability. But what else is important, implicit in that definition? First day access. Students show up on the first day of class, get the same course materials, access at the same time. So I always say, if you want to remember what's the value proposition of inclusive access, just remember the 3 A's: affordability, accessibility, achievement. Something we haven't talked about. Does it work? Yes. We're seeing that students are achieving outcomes at a greater rate than before. So as Dom said, we're very excited to come together to offer this. It's not going to solve the debt crisis, as he said, but it is moving the needle, and everybody's winning in this scenario. So now that you know the definition, what does it offer? It offers data analytics for the instructor, by the way, so they can see access to the materials, all the adaptive learning that you've heard in the past, e-books, courseware, all those things are still intact. But how does it work once it's enabled on your campus? We work with your bookstores to negotiate the rates, the discounted rates, the agreement. But the takeaway on this slide is you still have academic freedom to choose the content that you want to go into the program. No one's mandating that you use Wiley, Product, McGraw-Hill, or Pearson. You choose the content you want to go in the program. Students show up on the first day. If that content is in an inclusive access program, they're billed. Now, students could say, I don't want to be billed. They have an opt-out clause in Texas. They can opt out and say, I'm going to go find it elsewhere. But, as I said in my definition, we're offering at or below market rates. So we're finding that those rates are lower and lower every year. Finally, they show up, as I already said, first day of class. They're accessing the same material at the same time. Everybody's on a level playing field, and off we go. Better learning outcomes. Next slide. Quickly, some national results. I'm most familiar with Mizzou because I've been there several times. Just look at those savings. In this case, the partnership really came to life, and I can share a quick story. The bookstore manager went out with local publishing reps from all companies and knocked on faculty's doors to say, look, we're all in this together. Join the program. We don't care what content you use, but we all have to address affordability, and those efforts have paid off, as you can see on this slide. Happy to share more examples, but just to show you at a national level. But you're probably more interested local. Everything is local, so I'm going to turn over to Jen Hill, and she'll share some of that with you.
Thank you. So just to give you some scope, we're working with about 525 institutions nationally on an inclusive access program. Locally, Austin Community College is a great example of an institution that did a pilot in summer 2018 with a certain 87 sections. And from that, they then organically grew their program to over 280 sections for fall 2018 with some pretty significant savings of over $700,000. We'll have additional updated savings from spring, but we haven't received that data yet. The Alamo Colleges, this is actually a really exciting story. Philip Anaya, who is the digital and OER coordinator, actually emailed me yesterday and said he has new savings data. And so I'm sharing this with you, and this slide is actually not current, but they have, he's like, we're almost close to the $10 million savings amount for students. They're at $9.3 million. Their affordability program is an umbrella of both OER and inclusive access. They call their inclusive access program I Am Direct and their OER program Alamo Open. The number of students that have benefited from this program that make up the 9.3 million are over 150,000 students. So it's pretty impactful for the Alamo colleges, and their program has launched in 2015. And again, they started small and then have organically grown their program at the institution. Just to give you a snapshot of all of the institutions in Texas that are participating. As you can see, the majority of institutions are actually the community college space. These programs these accounts that are listed on this sheet are actually, they vary and range from pilot institutions to full-blown implementations like the one that we just discussed at Alamo. The public four-year institutions are pretty minimal, as you can see, and it's not for a lack of interest or a lack of not wanting to move forward with a program like that. We have actually, all of you represent different institutions in the four-year space. We've had conversations with all of your institutions, and again, it's not for a lack of not being interested. It's more of a need of some clarification from legislation that we're seeking.
So again, with that, where we are today is again with just in the last 2 years. In fact, it's about this time 2 years ago that we really started as an industry promoting and having these conversations with institutions, as Jen suggested. But here's where the challenge, here's where the rubber meets the road, and why the universities we found are having a challenge in terms of really kind of connecting with this and scaling it. So the U.S. Department, and that's one of your handouts there, and this may be regulations you're very familiar as financial aid directors, because it comes out of the portion of the code, U.S. Department of Education regulations, kind of deals with dispersing funds for Title IV financial aid, et cetera. So it was about 3 or 4 years ago now that they adopted regulations that basically allow for inclusive access, allow for the mechanism for inclusive access arrangements and agreements to be adopted by institutions. Essentially what they said was, because again, this is a different model. Think when I started out talking about the Blockbuster model versus the Netflix model, right? This is a different model. Instead of it being the students, taking either their card or the balance that they have after they come out of your offices or out of the business office and going to the bookstore and then buying their materials, this is being charged as a fee as part of their tuition and fee bill, considered like a course fee, right? So again, what the U.S. Department of Education said a few years ago was they said that institutions can cover this as a fee, can charge a fee for the purposes of these kinds of arrangements under very specific conditions. And we'll talk a little bit about those in the following slide. The challenge is with the universities, again, because community colleges have a lot more flexibility in terms of tuition fees because of local control. The universities, particularly Chapter 54 of the Education Code, as many of you are very well familiar with, it's very complex. There's a lot of different ways, fees can be charged, how they can be charged. Some require student votes, some require board approval. And what we found was that the universities would look, the lawyers, being as smart as they are, would look to the code and say, okay, now where do I fit this? And, in the absence of clear direction on where this fits, particularly when we had last session a lot of talk about freezing tuition and fees, the natural reaction is, well, I would rather not do anything if I don't know exactly how to do it, because I don't want to have to answer to the legislature for doing something that, they decide later wasn't appropriate. And so that's really where the rubber meets the road here, why we're here today and what we've been doing at the legislature. So the copy of the bill that you have in front of you, again, filed by Representative Howard from here in Austin and Senator Menendez from San Antonio, this is basically what it does. What it does is authorize very clearly in statute. It authorizes the universities and institutions to adopt an affordability program in line with what the federal regulations allow, inclusive access. Key elements. Again, it allows for these innovative pricing models, what Kevin kind of walked us through in the previous slide. It allows for institutions to package that cost into the tuition and fee bill, and the important part of that is, as you know, when it's packaged in that way, the federal regulations say you can apply Title IV financial aid against it to offset it. You know, again, that's if applicable and as available, right? And another very important feature here, and again, this is very important because, again, I think that the U.S. Department of Education recognizes it important. We as publishers is that consumer choice, student choice has to be paramount. So in these programs, they have the ability to opt out. That when they get to their course and it's History 101, they say, okay, we're going to, you have a $25, $30 fee here for your course. If the student believes that, you know what, I think I can get that for $20, or I've got that, from my brother who just took the course, they don't have to pay. They can say, I opt out. They don't have to pay the fee, and they're responsible for those materials on their own. So again, just what does it do? Again, what this legislation does is basically allows the universities to take advantage of what the community colleges have been doing for the last 2 years, to take advantage of the kind of mechanism that Alamo and Austin Community College, making it very clear to them that they have that ability in code, and they can point to the regulations, which, by the way, the coordinating board in this legislation has rulemaking authority. Which is very important because, as you know, Texas 60 by 30 makes affordability one of the 4 pillars, if you will, of the long-range plan. So who better to kind of make sure that these programs get implemented in the way that are intended, not only in terms of what the federal regulations say, but in terms of what the state's trying to achieve, than the coordinating board. So that's another important factor here. And then, kind of the last thing we want to emphasize is what doesn't it do? We know that, as many of you know, many of your campuses have OER, Open Educational Resources. This legislation will not, it should have no impact. It's not written to have any impact. It will have in no way does it contradict, compete with, or undermine the work that's already underway in the state for OER or at your individual institutions. Specifically, as you know, the coordinating board was given authority last year to offer a grant program. To give grants to faculty members who create courses for OER. That program, this has no impact on it. And I know there's money, there are requests for money to fund that again for the next biennium. And in fact, as we mentioned, and Jen mentioned in terms of Alamo, what we see across the country is a kitchen sink approach when it comes to affordability for textbooks. And by kitchen sink, I mean, like I said, there's more options available. There's OER, there's textbook rental, there's inclusive access, any number of different initiatives. And what we find is institutions are saying, let's use them all. And we always point out, I think Ohio has been probably one of the most aggressive and expansive affordability initiatives for every institution in that state. I believe it even covers the privates, right? Yes. So public, privates, community colleges, 4 years, Ohio Link. And recently, last year, the publishers signed an inclusive access agreement on a statewide basis that they estimate will save about $40 million a year. But I think you'll see there from John Carney, the chancellor of the Ohio Department of Education, as he clearly kind of points out that this is not, this is one aspect of our work. We're doing this other stuff with OER, and we're making it all work, again, to kind of maximize savings, to make sure that we're using every strategy available to us to reduce costs. Again, this isn't going to solve the student debt crisis, let's be clear, but these are real dollars. So when we talk about Austin Community College and $66 per course, I doubt that'll help them pay their rent per se, but that's real money, that's real dollars, and so we think it's important. And then we'll just close. I think, Jen, were you going to do this? Or? Sure, so just to be clear, in terms of our outreach, again, we've been having this conversation since literally this time 2 years ago. We started having this conversation a little bit at the session last year, but we weren't really ready. We didn't really understand at that point that there was a problem in state code that would prevent institutions from adopting or discourage them. When we recognized that, we very quickly after session, I guess this was in the summer of 2017, we actually held a symposium here in Austin. We brought in experts from around the country who had adopted some of those institutions that you see there. We brought in, invited the universities and community colleges representatives. The coordinating board actually, Dr. Ginger Grossman participated on a panel. I think Jeff Webster was there too. Anyways, and again, this was just to socialize the concept, show them how best practices are working, and answer questions. We did a second one just this last September in Houston, very similar format. But we've also, as I mentioned at the beginning, we talked to the coordinating board and having conversations. In fact, they're working at the Learning Technology Advisory Committee has been talking about this kind of since our first conversation about how can we do this, perhaps on a statewide basis like Ohio. The Community College Teachers Association, the trustees. Again, the point here being is that this is part of a conversation. I think Kevin put it really well, that as a change in the model, you probably would have never seen 3 publishing companies sitting together at a table, let alone working together and having this kind of conversation. It is a game changer in terms of how the model, in terms of the industry works, and that's why we've been very transparent and why we're here today, not only to kind of bring you up to speed about what the legislature's looking at in our work, but also to invite questions. We don't have all the answers. In fact, I think we do have a couple questions for you, actually, that you might be able to help us with. But with that, we're finished, and we open up to questions.
Number one, I want to really applaud your activities. This is pretty amazing. You're staying ahead of the game and figuring out what the market is going to be, and that's just great.
Thank you.
I do have a question.
Sure.
You've talked about textbooks. What we've been seeing as we do our student cost surveys is that the costs have been going down because students are doing rentals and going online and doing other things. But one thing that has been subsequently increasing is supplies. So how does this impact? Because are we going to have to, when we're doing our cost of attendance, figure out what portion is books and that's going to go in the fee, and then what portion is supply and that's going to go in COA? I'm a little confused.
So I'll start, and then my colleagues may have an answer. So that's, again, we don't have as much insight into how how you all do that kind of calculation. I will say that is one of the things that why we had that first slide kind of breaking out those costs and kind of decoding what books and supplies, because I think what we do see, particularly like the College Board number, which is obviously referred to, and I expect the folks in the research from Trellis could probably dig a little deeper in this as well, that there is a difference there. Unfortunately, the publishing industry, like for example, a computer or an iPad, that's something we have very little control over. Well, I would say none. But that is a challenge. How will you break that out? What I would suggest is that I think by moving to this kind of model, it becomes much more transparent. I'll let my colleagues correct me if I'm wrong, because we'll be able to know, like, this is what we can offer, for a course, and it's not, you don't know whether there's 5 or 6 books. It's all included. It's one cost. And that sort of data, may be able to help you get to that point where you're able to kind of, just differentiate between, an instructional material cost and supplies in a better, in a way that's more instructive for you. But I don't know if that's helpful. And
I just want to make one other point. So at the time of registration, if a course at the institution is participating in this type of program, you could see what the cost of materials is for the student at the time that they go and register. So if they're taking an Intro to Psychology course, you can see what that price of the course materials is. So if that student is taking numerous courses that all participate in this type of model, it's pretty easy to aggregate that cost for materials separate from supplies, if that helps at all.
It does somewhat, but it also leads to some more complications.
Oh, yes.
Because I'm just envisioning, I'm going to have to sit down and figure out course costs for every single course across the university come up, because right now, in the cost of attendance, it's an allowance for books and supplies. So, how are we going to be figuring out what that should be now? And then I'm a little confused about, okay, so that somehow then becomes a fee to the student. And how am I communicating that to student accounting to say, okay, this is the fee? It's technical stuff. I love the concept. I think it's great. It's just figuring out how we navigate that process is a little interesting.
For sure. I also, Taryn, Samantha, if you would, I will say, you could probably answer that better than we can. So if you don't mind.
Thank you.
Yeah.
TCC approached it from a faculty-led decision and research with a partnership with our procurement office. And they did bring other entities in, including financial aid, business services. We actually were transitioning to a different bookstore. To answer your specific question, I don't think the program is large enough yet for me to actually go in and decide to change the way I'm currently doing cost of attendance for books. But if the program were to grow and become a majority of our courses, then there would have to be some type of discussion. We also use OERs. Of course, I'm not factoring in that in my cost of attendance at all. Those students are given some books and supplies allowance. It is very technical between the publishers, the institution, the bookstores, information, and getting everyone in the room is a complex situation. So currently, I haven't done anything from the financial aid perspective because it isn't large enough yet, but it is something I'm keeping an eye on. We didn't have fees at our institution. We did go through the board, got it approved to offer these fees. So that was kind of new, but again, it's charged with tuition, it just automatically pays it. The opt-out is an interesting process that, again, the institution has to decide how to do. What I can't speak to is I haven't seen all of the success beyond the pilot. I haven't seen that. And it was limited to the top 25 courses that we offer with the most students in it. And again, it was faculty-led, so the faculty decided. I will reiterate that it was the faculty can choose which publisher to work with, that we had 5 or 6. I mean, that part of it didn't change, and our procurement office was very good at working with the publishers and getting the prices. For some courses, it doesn't change the price. For other courses, it significantly changes it. And again, that's another factor the institution may have to decide. Is it easier to go with a flat rate? Is it easier to go with the individual course per student, per class? There are multiple different ways of implementing it to help your students, but it's only positive. But it is a lot of work. It is not easy. You have to get people invested, and I think we did it right from the faculty perspective. If the faculty aren't on board, they're not going to use it. The only other thing to mention is it is well beyond a textbook. At least I was told the initial thought was we don't want just a digital textbook. We want to use the other analytics as well as the additional information that comes with the digital content so that it isn't, which is a downside for students who choose to opt out, because the faculty are engaging the material and they really are encouraging the students to buy it at the discount price or getting it at the discount price. So again, it's your population. You're going to have to figure out which departments, which colleges within your institution better fits this model.
Thank you so much. But I mean, you bring up a really good point, and I think this is where we really view this as a partnership. When we start talking about this type of model at your institution, we come in and we consult and say, these are the parties that really need to be a part of the conversation. And, again, we don't have all of the answers, but if we can get all of the right people in the room to have the conversation, that sets the program up for success from day one.
So just so I can understand, each publisher has their own inclusive program, and then you approach the school as a single publisher or as a group?
So, it really varies, but this is the model. This is a business model, and so we're all here to talk about the business model. I'm with McGraw-Hill, there's Pearson Wiley, et cetera, and so we all have our different products that then faculty are choosing to adopt that then fit into this model. So we can approach this in a number of different ways. We've had a lot of meetings where we've all come in together to just talk about and socialize the interest in the model and talk about other implementations that we have worked on across the country. But it really is, ultimately, it's up to the faculty on what is used in the course, and we're here to represent an industry-wide model. Does that, go ahead.
And just to add, why are we being kumbaya about it, honestly? It takes price out of the conversation finally, so that we can walk in, let's use physics and say, we have great content in physics. If you agree, use Wiley. If you don't, use McGraw-Hill. And that's fair for everybody, right? That's number one. Number 2 point is it's either digital, e-text, courseware, when you're talking about analytics, or print in the program. We can control the materials, and that's about it. But we can negotiate those prices. And the 3rd point, we were just talking before we came up here, the work really starts after you enable the campus. We don't go, oh, right, Terrence enabled and we can go play golf or whatever. We have to go around and I actually recruit faculty to participate in the program, you know. So that's where we need your help too at some stage.
I do have one question. When it comes to the market rate, what is taken into consideration for that number crunch? Is it just the rates set by the publishers, or is it other vendors such as like CHEG or, you know, any other organization overall?
So let me address, I'll let my colleagues address kind of the nuance and that, but let me just address what that means. That's a kind of a term of art that the feds set. So when the feds created this in regulation, they said 3 things have to happen. Before we will enable you to assess a charge at Tarrant County, that then you can factor in the financial aid and do all this stuff that we allow you to do, you have to meet these 3 conditions. First and foremost, number 1 is you can only do this if you can demonstrate that you're offering students something of value and it is discounted. That's the whole purpose of it. You can't have an affordability program if it's not affordable, right? So they use the terminology below market rate. Now that is maybe a term of art, and I think that's where the institution, again, from the standpoint of the institution, they only have the students' interests at heart, not ours, right? They want to negotiate. If they're trying to do affordability, they're going to try to get the best pricing. So, but it's from the regulation standpoint, from the policy standpoint, and this again is reiterated in the statute, right? Because we have to again follow the rules. Is that it has to be below market rate? But I'll let.
I mean, that's a great question. We look at digital list price, best available from across the board. And typically, a national average is around 72% compared to a print text. So admittedly, digital works better than printing. Print makes it a little more complicated conversation. But yes, we look at all those entities and come up with the market rate from a digital list standpoint. And then to Dominic's point, there is some plus or minus $5 and percentage points here or there depending on the program or the campus.
Yes, go ahead.
Related to that, can I ask how you have determined the campus savings that you're identifying in terms of, is that the fees that students were charged versus what they would pay if they bought all recommended textbooks for the course, which we know they don't do? So the savings might be slightly exaggerated, but at least the students all have the materials?
So let me say, and I don't know if we have a precise answer. What we can do is, and that's why we put the names on the slide, I'm sure Philip in San Antonio would be more than happy to explain his rationale. I think, to your point, I mean, these aren't precise numbers, right? And there's different ways you can consider, because that's a good point that you make, like, you know, how do we account for whether or not, I suspect that the way this is typically calculated, and I think this is correct, but we'll get some clarification, that it's okay. So if we know that history, here's what is typically required, and there's a textbook and something else that goes along with it, and that's the pricing for that is X. And, you know, we choose Wiley's inclusive access arrangement, and that's Y, X minus Y, and then you multiply that over the number of students. And so it's an estimate. It's a solid number, but it's not. I wouldn't say that we, you know, if I wouldn't use this kind of calculation to land me on the moon, but I'd use it to get me close enough to like pass it and, you know, get a good look at it, right? But I would say this. I think this is absolutely something, though, why it's important that the coordinating board be part of the rulemaking process for this. Because I actually think that this is a conversation that we ought to have. And to your point, Chair, about the technical aspect of it, and the conversation you're starting to have about now, how do I calculate cost of attendance? That is something we ought to be talking about. the first step is we have to make sure that everyone feels like they, that we handle the first question, because we're getting, not only are we getting those questions, but we're getting questions from institutions like, how do I do this legally? And we're the last people to advise the institutions on that. So once we cross that bridge, I think that's why this conversation longer term, because the other thing that I would point to, and again, as an alumni of the coordinating board, I really appreciate the data and the metrics that the coordinating board collects. And I will tell you, as you know, that fourth pillar for Texas 60 by 30 on affordability and debt load, right, that we're looking at. I think there's some great metrics that we can pull out, from this kind of conversations as this kind of scales across Texas to really give us what are we doing in Texas that's helping save dollars. Not solving the debt crisis, but it's part of the conversation. So I don't know if that's helpful, and they may have some more insight, and we can talk to our partners to see how they're calculating it. But I think that's absolutely something that comes out of this once we get it kind of clear in statute. Have a conversation with the coordinating board, with the publishers, with the institutions about now. Let's all agree on a way to calculate what kind of metrics can we get? How do we get there so it's standardized? To your point. So I don't know.
I do want to say thank you so much for this, and Chad, thank you for bringing this forward. And I did not understand the variance between the federal and the state, and this trying to figure this all out for us. I have a whole new perspective on it. I wish I had this a few moments ago when I was trying to do my legislative analysis for my institution.
Oh, no.
That would have been super helpful. But this has been extremely helpful, and it gives a whole new perspective on some things that are coming down the pike for the future for all of us. And Samantha, will you be willing to be a resource for folk around the state?
Absolutely. I mean, I can find out the experts at our campus as well with how it's been going. But yeah, absolutely.
And I know you're busy, so please, if there are questions, I know Dr. Pools, you have our information. We're happy to answer questions. I do think we have one question we'll kind of just leave on the table, and you may have some insights. One question that's been coming up is how do whether or not you charge taxes against, like there's bills to kind of waive sales tax on textbook purchases, right? Because when you go to the bookstore, you charge taxes. It's a retail transaction. There is some question about does that need to be addressed on this side? Because if you're moving towards a fee, I don't believe you charge taxes currently on tuition and fees. So again, this is one of those technical. There's a lot of little technical bits and pieces that we have to work out. But anyways, really appreciate the time. I hope this was timely and helpful to you. Sounds like it was. Any questions, feedback, comments? You don't like something in the bill? I mean, listen, we're all ears. We don't have all the answers. We want to make this right, do the right thing by students ultimately. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Perfect. Item G is the external relations update. Ginger is going to be speaking with us instead of John today.
Good morning. Oh, this is different. I will.
Can you raise it?
Yeah. No. Okay. Not without my hand. So I'll just speak loudly. Yes. Thank you for having me. It's nice to see some familiar faces. I am going to fill in for John. I will do my best to share the information. I will do my best to answer any questions, but mostly I'll just be taking notes of your questions. So we're going to give you an update on the coordinating board recommendations related to financial aid. Senate Bill 1192 by Senator West and House Bill 3042 by Representative Chris Turner have been introduced to create the Texas Works program. This is an internship program where the Works stands for Working Off Campus, Reinforcing Knowledge and Skills. This coordinating board recommendation will provide paid internship opportunities for full-time undergraduate students and advance the state's 60 by 30 text goals relating to marketable skills and student ed. So specifically, the bill authorizes the coordinating board to utilize a portion of the current work-study appropriation to administer a centralized off-campus work-study program. The program priorities will be established in rule and include activities supporting timely completion, such as enrollment in 15 or more credit hours per semester, and integrate the concept of wraparound services, for example, online training or other activities that prepare students for basic workforce expectations. And this is all to help students prepare for career and life. So of note, this bill removes the requirement that 20 to 50% of an institution's Texas college work-study positions be located off campus. So in a way, we're transitioning that proportion of work studies that have to be off campus that is now for institutions' responsibility, shifting it to the centralized responsibility at the coordinating board. Any questions on that I can make notes of?
Ginger,
Yes.
Did you say that it requires a student to be enrolled in 15 hours? What was the comment about?
What the notes say that any rules established around the program will address issues such as that, but perhaps one of the recommendations would be that a student be enrolled in 15, a minimum per hour. So,
Ginger, just to be very clear, unanimously across this table, that's high.
Again, my interpretation is that if the bills pass and we enter into rulemaking, that will be one of the considerations, and that would be in a way to maximize the reach of the grant program. So, be ready to provide your feedback when we get to the rulemaking process. So next, House Bill 2968 by Representative John Frullo has been introduced to help protect the ability of the coordinating board to obtain sufficient bonding authority to support demand in the college access program, college access loan, or the CAL program. So increasing demand for the limited pool of tax-exempt statewide bonding authority creates the risk that the coordinating board may not be able to secure adequate bonding authority to fund the loan program. House Bill 2968 would increase the amount of bonding authority the coordinating board may request per issuance from $75 million per project to $200 million, sufficient to ensure adequate funding is available to continue to support the student loan program. Any questions there? Great, because I could not speak to that at all. So moving on. Senate Bill 34 was introduced by Senator Judith Zaffirini to reduce lifetime eligibility for Texas grants from 150 semester credit hours to 135 semester credit hours, or 15 semester credit hours beyond degree requirements, whichever of the two is greater. So this recommendation will encourage both students and institutions to focus on more efficient degree completions while still providing a cushion beyond degree requirements. Also, the agency estimates that implementing a 135 cap on Texas grant eligibility will allow institutions to redirect $11.2 million to approximately 2,400 newly eligible students. The agency is examining data regarding the impact of this change by different categories of students, race, ethnicity, for example. But the larger point here is that incenting more efficient degree completion will benefit all students by reducing their costs of education and increasing their likelihood of success. So.
Okay, Ginger, we have had conversations with John on this on the past. Our concern at that point in time was to see if the coordinating board could do some data analysis. I know that folk at TASFA have done so, and the general consensus seems to be that there's some significant impacts for retention of certain groups of students that are coming in that might need some preparatory coursework, and then also students that are doing dual degrees. So while we understand the idea of having the ability, this is a rationing device that will then allow us to redirect money to incoming students. The issue is that with the 60 by 30 and with the current regulations, the intent is that we're financing our continuing students first. So there is some tension there, and the institutions would like the coordinating board to understand that, and if there was a way that we could We have just several students, there's several institutions that have done this analysis, but if we could have a fuller picture on that, that would be helpful. Alan, do you want to speak to that at all? I know that the legislative committee, Alan and Zelma, the legislative committee, has been compiling information. Do you, any other additional comments?
I know you'd be surprised, but no.
Well-
we understand that. I mean, just being a financial aid director, you understand how students run into problems and how they accumulate those hours, degree plan changes, and those kind of things that fall into that. But also understand the side of freeing money up to other students and pushing students to complete on time. I often wonder, do students really see that full picture when they're freshmen and the consequences of their action or inactions, taking the right classes?
And we will be sure to reiterate your concerns with John. I know we do have some initial data. I looked at them briefly, but I don't feel comfortable commenting on them because I didn't have time to absorb them fully. What I would recommend, and this is taking my ER hat off, because I know that you all are part of conversations on your campuses about guided pathways and helping students to more efficient completion. Yes.
Whoever is calling in, if you could please put your phone on mute because we're getting feedback from whatever you're doing right now.
Thank you. Yes, it was sounding like the raccoon that's in my attic, which is hopefully being removed right now. So yes, I know that you're part of these conversations on your campuses, or you're hearing about the conversations about guided pathways. So regardless of this bill, I don't know the future of it, but I hope that you continue to have those conversations and use your concerns about Texas grants to bolster those conversations on your campus. Take this to your leadership. Talk about how low socioeconomic students are impacted by the cafeteria plan of selecting courses more so than other students who have an established network who can inform them. So again, I don't know what will happen with this conversation, but this idea of how this could impact your Texas grant students could fuel this conversation towards guided pathways on your campuses.
I think we do understand the intent, and there's just tensions that
No,
exist.
I
and we
totally
don't want an
understand.
unintended consequence coming up.
Absolutely, and we very much appreciate you bringing your concern, you're sharing your concerns with us.
I mean, I think one of the issues that can happen, I mean, we see students take classes in summer, for instance. They're not receiving Texas grant money for that. Maybe they're trying to work on a master's program. Maybe they're doing something that's of interest to them, but that, those are the kind of consequences that catch some of these students
Right.
in a hard place, which the 150 hours still allowed some of that. Now that's gotten tighter. If someone's trying to work on a master's program, take some classes, don't count towards that degree, where does that kind of leave them?
Right, right. And our commissioner was presenting to the Senate Higher Ed Committee this morning, and he spoke several times about how advising is absolutely paramount to student success. And I think a lot of this conversation will come back to that. So, any other questions you'd like me to make note of?
Yes, from a K-12 perspective, more and more we're being forced to tell 8th graders what they're supposed to do for the rest of their lives. And, the fact is, 2/3 of students that enter college change their majors before they graduate. So we have a real challenge to live up to this, not only the TEA requirements for endorsements and such. Just saying.
I totally understand, and you do have hats off, both ER and other hats, for the work that you're doing in implementing HB5, because I know it's not easy. I think if it's done well, yes. Okay. All right, and finally, Senate Bill 330 by Senator Zaffirini and House Bill 3137 by Representative Donna Howard would allow a student to enroll in a community college baccalaureate degree program to receive TEOG up to 135 hours or 15 hours beyond degree requirements. So this addresses an issue that arose when the legislature approved the expansion of community college baccalaureate degree programs last session and will allow students in these programs access to appropriate state financial aid. Any questions on that? Okay, so I have a question for you, if you don't mind. So Senate Bill 499, Senator Seliger proposed a bill that would reopen Senate Bill 887 from last session, the student loan debt letter. And the bill basically says that that the previous legislation cannot require the inclusion of private loans. And our interpretation as coordinating board staff is that the current bill already allows for that. So I was just wondering, do you have any feedback you might be able to offer on that bill or what you're hearing from the field?
So Ginger, my recollection of 2 years ago when that was passed was that while legislation didn't specifically say it, legislative intent as interpreted and said in one of these meetings was that private loans should be included. And I think a lot of the schools took exception to that. And I know that our state association, TASFA, has been in support of making that clear. In fact, a letter should be being sent this week in support of Senate Bill 499, just to make sure that everybody understands and there's no questions of the legalities of not including private student loans.
And I agree with everything that Alan is saying. I mean, I think it's needed to just make sure that it's clarified and everyone sees it straightforward, that language, because there was a lot of different interpretations, and so we welcome the SB 499.
Okay. Well, I can say I fielded most of the questions on the debt letter, and my consistent response has been that private loans should be included if you have access to them and if that access is reasonable. So I guess that has been our, free exit card for that part of the legislation. But you're concerned that institutions are still stressing out over this part?
And I guess it's like, I'm not speaking on task for our committee that's worked on that. But I would say, just saying that causes confusion. Because let's say I do have access to that information. I don't believe, just personally, I do not believe that it's right to include that, because when you talk about calculating a repayment amount or an interest rate, I mean, who knows? Do they still have that? Is it paid off? I know from the Department of Education if they still have a loan outstanding, or I know that if it's been paid off within reason. I have no idea about private loans. I have no idea what their interest rates are. So for me to calculate something for a student can really become very misleading as to what their payment's going to be, their terms of when they're going to have to pay that back. So just the idea that it's vague as to whether, okay, included if you have it. Well, if I have it, I still don't want to really include that. I may want to note to a student, hey, this does not include private loans, and you need to take that into consideration, and can help them walk through that process. But just to include that, even if I had the information, I wouldn't want to.
And I really want to reiterate what Alan is saying, because half the time, if we're doing a private loan, the school doesn't even know about it. We don't have to certify. So even if we do know about it, for me to have to go out and look at every single lender's private loan terms and trying to figure out what they're charging at that moment in time on interest is such a burden. And I don't know what value add there is for the student in that.
And that makes sense. Through the webinars that we provided on the debt letter, that was not the process we recommended. We recommended a standard process. And again, in your language where you're disclaiming that you can't guarantee the accuracy of the debt letter. We don't, and we certainly did not intend for you to have that kind of burden, having to go out and look at every private loan. But this is really helpful for me to understand where the bill is coming from. So thank you for sharing that.
Before you leave, I just want to mention that I don't know about the rest of you, but we're in the flurry of the last bills that have been filed and doing all of the analysis of that. I know I have, I think, 6 or 8 bills waiting for analysis when I get back to campus. But one of the ones that came up just recently that I thought was interesting, I believe it's House Bill 2206. I could be wrong on the number, but that was the idea that the coordinating board would contract with potentially UT Austin to set up an eTASFA form. And I just throw that out as information for the schools. No idea where that's going to go at this point, even if the bill passes, but just the thought that the coordinating board is interested in taking on that task because it's something that we've asked for before.
And it's House Bill 2140.
2140, thank you. I knew I was probably wrong on the number.
Can I ask, is that a coordinating board sponsored piece of legislation?
No, it is not. So that was something that arose. We are in the midst of the legislative analysis, and some of the points that we're raising to make sure are clarified in anything that occurs is that the TASFA is not actually a state-sanctioned form. It's a form that was created by a volunteer coordination of the institutions. And so in terms of what would guide any information that's included in it, there's no statutory guidance as to what we would actually put in that. Diane saying that it was to partner with UT Austin, that's the first I'd heard that that's what that was for, so
In the
it's
same
all very
way,
new.
in the same way that UT Austin partners with Apply Texas.
So that's not in the bill itself, so if that's intent, that's something that'll need to be clarified in the bill as well. So there's those couple pieces. We also are looking in and trying to talk with providers, software providers, to figure out whether or not software providers could even accept the information from an electronic TASFA, so Power Fades and other organizations, in order to load that, because of any implications that it would have if it had to load in as, say, an institutional methodology as opposed to a federal methodology, and things like that. So this is something that we're trying to make sure that we provide as much feedback as possible as to what challenges might exist so that the sponsor can write as strong a bill as possible.
And we need to be crystal clear, UT is not advocating for this. We don't even know if we can do it. It's just something that's been a question that was raised.
Yeah. And I guess my question, for a point of clarification, Chad, is that I understand we have a subcommittee to review the TASFA application, right?
The Financial Aid Advisory Committee has a subcommittee to provide input. The agency serves as the administrative coordinator to assemble the volunteer form, and that's with TG's transition to Trellis, that they kind of moved out of that space of coordinating, and so the agency took on the coordination of the annual update, but it's not an agency form, it's not a state-sponsored form. It was created, in fact, we put together a history on it of kind of when it was created and who created it. So the reason the Financial Aid Advisory Committee created the subcommittee was to make sure that there was more input into it, and those pieces, but it's not a state-sponsored form.
Which I think is interesting that we give state aid to TASFA students, but the agency doesn't control the application for which aid is given. It just seems really
Correct.
odd.
It allows, because institutions might have their own application. For example, technically UT Austin has its own application because they've created an online form. And so they might have their own institutional application. An institution might hand a student a copy of the paper FAFSA and just say, here, fill this out and turn it into us, and then we'll load it into our system accordingly. And so it's currently the institution is able to collect the data in whatever way is most efficient for their particular population. Whereas this would create a centralized piece requiring institutions to follow one way of doing it, and thus wanting to make sure that all the authorities are put in place to require institutions, because if we create the statewide form, And then institutions can also have their own institutional form, or they can do a paper FAFSA, or they can do a paper of their own form. Then we've actually added complexity to the process as opposed to streamlining the complexity of the process. But that's a point that we've made both in the TASFA and in there are 3 different bills requiring completion of the FAFSA, either as a high school graduation requirement or for any students that have earned a certain amount of dual credit. And so that's a point that we've made, was to make sure that everyone understands that the TASFA isn't a statewide authorized form in terms of statutory authorization, and that there's no mechanism for collecting who has done a TASFA. So we've pointed out, how would a high school know that a TASFA has been completed or an institutional application has been completed in order to certify them for graduation. So that's the feedback we're giving, is just making sure that if we go in this direction, that the bill provides the guidance to make sure that everyone that needs to be participating is participating, and that it's very clear as to what needs to be included, et cetera, in order to make sure that institutions have the data that they're going to need, and that it's collected in a way that reduces rather than increases the burden on the institutions and on the students.
I do want to add one thing, and this is actually on behalf of Terry. I know this came up a few years ago when I was at a meeting with institutions and high school counselors, that one of the questions they brought forth at the end of the meeting very strongly was, could we have one standardized process for the TASFA? Could somebody come up with something? So that's another piece that I think that the ISDs would be very interested in, having communication and understanding, taking that burden off the students, because right now it's every institution's doing their own thing, and it's very difficult.
Yeah, I would continue that. I was thinking of some logic here in what's going on here, which I think is a lack of somebody grabbing on and saying, we just need to make this available to students in a way that is easy for them. So if we say it is the state's intent to provide state resources to provide access to higher education to the population of students who are served here, undocumented students, if in fact we see that the majority of those students are students of color, and we see the ability of those students to access higher ed is significantly behind others, and our goal by 60 by 30 is to get more people there, and I would assume that population is counted in that goal, my conclusion is we need to get behind this somehow and find a way to provide a consistent, easy form, a standard process for this population to qualify for the aid that the state intends to provide to them.
Actually, can I? Oh,
go ahead.
Being new to Texas, I'm actually you just shocked me. I had no idea that it was not, how you say it, a state-sanctioned form, because to me it doesn't make sense. If you're providing this and you want a consistency or you want to be able to look at it, you just listed like 5 other options that we don't even use. So I'm kind of surprised that it's that way, because we are supporting state aid. So I'm with it, to standardize it and have one. And the high schools ask us all the time, how do we do this? Well, we've got this form. Well, why does it look that way? And then they've talked to another area and it looks different from what we have. So it would be nice to get support behind it. That's my personal, coming from other states that have forms,
And one of the things I want to point out is when I was giving that feedback, our role at the agency is to just provide feedback on the bill as to things to be considered. We don't take an opinion of being for or against anything. And so we're in the midst of putting together all of the analysis. Some of the specific things, I found the analysis that we've done so far, some of the specific things that we've mentioned are that the impact is unclear due to questions regarding who's required to use the electronic TASFA and how it will be developed. So it says create one, but it doesn't say anything about whether or not it's required or not. And so wanting to raise that question of, do we end up with now a 5th or 6th way of filling out the TASFA? We mentioned that students who file a TASFA instead of a FAFSA could potentially benefit from having a centralized location to enter the data, though we did mention that it's uncertain as to their comfort level utilizing a central tracking system, because questions have been raised as to whether the population that utilizes a TASFA, whether they will be comfortable entering their data into a centralized government system to indicate that they're not eligible to file a FAFSA, and whether there's any concerns in creating a statewide database of students who aren't eligible to file a FAFSA. Currently, we don't collect any information. We collect if someone's an affidavit student, but we don't collect why they're an affidavit student, whether they're an international student here on other means, whether they moved in from another state and are with grandparents and met the requirements, whether they're an undocumented student, et cetera. We don't have any of those details. And so we weren't sure whether or not, say, undocumented students would have concerns about entering their data into a centralized database. We mentioned that institutions who utilize the TASFA could potentially benefit if the system can be developed in a way that effectively interacts with their current financial aid software systems, and that the state would potentially benefit from an increase in applicants, though without additional appropriations, this would simply result in identifying additional eligible applicants and not in additional students receiving state financial aid. So it would simply reduce the percentage of students that are funded through our programs. So those are pieces we just raised to try to make sure that as they're developing this, they're thinking about those pieces. We're still writing everything. There's a couple different divisions that are working on this analysis. One of the things that I suggested was whether or not, rather than a bill that specifically requires the creation of the form, whether it would be more effective to have a bill that required that the coordinating board engage an institutional task force specifically on this to make a recommendation for the next legislative session, so that the issues of compatibility with software, student comfort with utilizing requirements, et cetera, could all be sure to be in the bill, as opposed to us having an unintended consequence of a bill getting passed and we're forced to create something that then doesn't do what everyone's hoping that it does.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have the bill specifically, but you made mention of the loan authority securing, bond securing the funds. Also another that came across my desk which seemed to expand the population that the loan authority might be able to provide loans to. So I guess any kind of comment on the intent of that, and if my interpretation is correct, because it seemed to talk about, it seemed like parents, but even anybody who had a loan or anybody who was trying to refinance a loan, this would be an avenue to, to do it through the loan authority.
I'm wondering if you're talking about the bill that would provide bonding authority to higher education authorities. The agency is not a higher education authority. Those are separate organizations. So I believe you're talking about the bonding authority to allow them to create these other programs. We have a bill at the agency to clean up the college access loan, just to kind of bring it current with how the program is run. But we are not looking to expand into parents. We're not looking to expand into refinancing or anything like that. But there is a bill that the higher education authorities have put forward to try to have bonding authority for them to offer these other programs. I know Ken Martin has met with the sponsors of that bill to explain the potential ramifications on how that could end up limiting the funds to the college access loan program, and thus we would have to reduce the students who can actually participate in that program.
So help me understand, I guess, other higher education authorities that might be making loans.
HESC, Higher Education Service Corporation up in North Texas. I'm not sure the names of the individual higher education authorities. Ken, do you? Brazos, HESC, those other, typically organizations that were in the FELP environment, who are no longer in the FELP environment, and have requested bond authority to now be able to offer alternative loans via bonds, as opposed, or via tax-exempt bonds specifically, as opposed to the current process that they have. So yes, that is not an agency piece, that is for other organizations.
So that helps me a lot, but it basically would just create other alternative lenders who are, I guess I would consider private lenders, that's my terminology, but the way they're securing their funds is through the state bonding process, which would be a more advantageous way for them to secure funds to loan. That's really what that's talking about.
Yes.
But it's not
Which is which is a limit. One of the things to be aware of is that bonding authority is a limited amount that can be lent state or can be authorized statewide, and so it won't necessarily expand. Excuse me. It won't necessarily expand the availability of alternative loans. It could potentially simply reduce the Cal availability and replace it with other programs. We do have this other bill that's been proposed to increase our bonding authority from $75 million to $200 million. We are guaranteed $75 million through the program. We are able to go in and try to utilize unutilized bonding authority that's still out there, and we do that every year, and we've been able to, and so we've been able to grow to about $150 million per year, but the demand for that unutilized funding is becoming very extreme. I think this last time, by 9 a.m., the day that you could submit your applications, they'd already received applications to use up all the money. And so we're concerned that we're going to reach a point that that additional allocation of bonding authority isn't going to be available, and thus we'd have to basically cut the Cal program in half from where it currently stands. And so Ken has led the charge to try to get an increase in the minimum that is guaranteed, or the amount that's guaranteed to us, so that we'd have $200 million available instead of just $75 million. And that would allow the Cal program to be in a strong place to make sure that we don't have to reduce the number of students participating in the program.
I do want to offer everyone a break in just a moment, but I have one quick question for you and/or Ginger. There was one bill that was talking about, that Zaffarini had introduced, about reinstituting the Be on Time program. And the way I was reading that was that it would be done through bonding authority and not through any portion of set-aside funds from the schools that would be going back. So the funding model would be completely different.
Yeah, and in that, a piece that I've been pointing out to everyone that's raised that, the only thing that's different is that it, in terms of funding, is that it does not include a set-aside. The opportunity to use either bonding authority or appropriations or other sources, that existed in the last program as well. So people are kind of looking at it and saying that that's new. That's just the language that was there before. The challenge with bonding authority is it's fiscally infeasible to have a zero-interest loan that is forgivable through a bond program, because you have to ensure that you're going to have enough return from the loans in order to not only pay off the bond itself, but all the interest, et cetera. And so there would be no way to issue bonds to fund a 0% interest forgivable loan program. So there would have to be some kind of appropriation involved, whether in tandem with bonds to pay off the portion that isn't going to get paid off, or just to cover the entire program. So that's a piece. The BOT as a whole, there are some slight differences to what it was before in terms of who's eligible and things like that. The program that's proposed, if you don't get it your first year that you're eligible for it, you can't participate in a future, kind of like Texas grant if you don't get it that first year. So there are some slight differences to the eligibility criteria. But that bonding authority was actually there all along. It's just without the set-aside, people are kind of falling back and thinking, oh, well, we can use bonding authority, but it would have to include appropriations in order to be a feasible program. Do you want me to give a quick rundown before we go on break, or do you want me to just give a quick rundown after we get back on just kind of what we're looking at?
Or how are you all feeling? Are you want to hang for a few minutes, or do you want to break right now?
It's just like a 3-minute rundown.
Okay, let's do it.
So just so that you're aware, out of the 270 or so bills that the agency is monitoring, SFAP is tracking about 44 bills. 11 of those are loan repayment program bills. It's a very popular topic this session, looking at creating loan repayment programs for guidance counselors, peace officers, nurses in long-term care facilities, school psychologists, as well as some modifications to the mental health, the physician, and the doctoral incentive LRPs that are out there. Other than loan repayment programs, the other two popular topics, both coming in with 7 bills each. One is that repealing the ability to issue license holds for defaulted borrowers. There's 7 different bills looking at repealing that authority. The agency itself doesn't actually use that authority, but the Office of the Attorney General, as well as some other organizations, do use that or do report that. There's also 7 bills proposing promise programs, meaning that tuition and fees will be covered for any recipient as last dollar scholarships. All but one of those are focused on 2-year institutions. One of the points that we've made in our analysis is that much of what's looking to be accomplished through the promise programs could be accomplished through increased funding through the TEOG program, since they mimic the TEOG in almost all circumstances. We talked about the fact that there's 4 bills proposing TASFA and FAFSA requirements. And then there's a dozen bills that are revising current programs. You heard about most of them, Texas Works, TOG, et cetera. And then there are also 12 bills that are proposing brand new programs that we're monitoring, including a first generation scholarship, an emergency grant program, exemptions for homeless students and disabled firefighters, a pilot for institutional loans at junior colleges, and restrictions on scholarships if UT and AM don't agree to have a football game every fall during the the third weekend of November. So that's kind of what we are following right now. If there's any of those that you'd be particularly interested in hearing, I can tell you more about them after a break.
Tad, would you be willing to share that list?
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, 10 minutes? Okay, well, let's see. How about if we're back here at 11:45? It's a little shy.
8 minutes.
8 minutes. Good to see you. I'm sorry, I don't know. I don't. I know until Lisa showed me last time. Yeah.
Like hallway.
Okay, so we should go back out that way?
You can go either way. You can go down the hallway right before you get to the exit. There's a little hallway to your right.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
How are you? Girl, glad you made it.
I know, finally. They switched languages always.
Right. I was like, I don't know. Right. Sounds like a good plan to me.
Whoever.
Yes.
with Shay. The committee did meet February 22nd here at the coordinating board, and we discussed 4 items on the agenda that was agreed upon between us and the coordinating board. Do you want?
Sure. I'll go ahead and talk about those items.
I'll chime in.
Is it still morning? Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
So a couple of the items that we did discuss had to do with the auto grant payments project. We introduced that at the last FAAC, and we had a lot of shouts of yay. No, we didn't have any great shouts at that time because it did ask for student level data. The way that project was introduced was that the 3 grant programs would be automated for their payments. And at the time, we were asking the administrators at the institutions to submit us a file, so upload a file with a lot of student level data. And with that, we got a lot of feedback from the financial aid community on the impact that would have on programming. Also, the fact that we have this student level data already in our financial aid database report that you guys so graciously do almost 3 times a year. And so to look at that and to determine if it's necessary for us to use that same concept for paying out the grant programs. We went back as a group and we assessed how we're currently using the financial aid database reports, the information we're getting from there, to see if it would be useful for us to continue a project to ask for student level data. I'm happy to announce that we have made modifications to the way that we are going to do the auto payment project. And what we've decided to do is to eliminate the need to provide student level data. So we're not asking anyone to provide us any student level data anymore. And it's still a process very similar to what the administrators at the institutions are already currently used to, which is the fund request form. The fund request form asks for information such as student count, as well as the dollar amount that you need us to pay out. It also asks for initial renewal, and we actually are planning to eliminate that as well. So what we would be asking for is more of an application that you would have to provide your student count and the dollar amount just on a cumulative. And that's the only pieces of information we're asking from the administrators. And also give you capability of reporting if you wanted to go in and look at how much money we've dispersed out, so it'll be more real time as well. And so the concept is that we would get what we needed from you all without you having to buy anything in addition to. It allows more of that flexibility for the coordinating board to still have its reporting needs when it's necessary, but it doesn't require programming on the institution side, and it's still a familiar process that you all are used to when it comes to requesting funds.
Can we just say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, huge applause.
So I want to just say thank you, because in order for us to make those type of modifications, we need to hear from the financial aid community. And it's very imperative that you do speak up because changes can be made. Nothing has to be set in stone, because when we roll out anything that we do for you all, we want to make sure that we have enough buy-in and that we have enough support from you guys as well. We don't want to make anything more complicated than it needs to be. And so I believe that with the wonderful feedback and the healthy conversations we've received, it allowed us to make some modifications to that auto grant payment project. That payment project is set out to release sometime in the summer as far as instructions and additional training. Although you don't get your funding until September 1st like normal, but you still can upload that information in probably starting by August 1st, like you typically would when you're doing the funds request form. So again, the process in itself still remains the same. We will do just any additional training when it comes to reporting needs, just so you understand the application, because the look and feel would be different. Any questions on that? We also talked about the 1920 financial aid database report. So we went over that to see what are some common things that we wanted to make any changes to. We had minimal modifications. Our goal is not to make a lot of changes going into 1920. As the legislation session ends, we can determine if there are any needed elements. At this current time, we don't have any additional elements to the financial aid database report, but that could change. But we will see see what that looks like. Again, our goal isn't to make any modifications until the 2021 year, which is another discussion that we had. Our goal as a committee was to look at how can we eliminate duplicate information and duplicate data elements that are being reported elsewhere throughout the agency. We did come up with some data elements that we believe we should look at when it comes to elimination. We looked at tuition and fees, exemptions and waivers, as well as ethnic origin, race, classification, possibly date of birth, residency, zip code, gender, transfer, first time in college, hours attempted for fall, as well as spring and cumulative hours attempted. So those are some discussions even within the agency that we've been having, as well as within our committee on some of the elements that we feel going into the 2021 year that we could possibly eliminate, just because we want to have data integrity. So there's no need for us to try to duplicate the same data in another area from two different sources. So we want to make sure that the sources stay the same, the information stay the same. And as you know, if you're reporting over here in the financial aid database report and you're reporting over here in CBM reporting, that may or may not always align because you have two reporting groups doing that. So if we know where we can get their sources from, is use that source and keep that separate. So we only get the information that we need from each reporting group. So. We also talked about summer grant awarding. If you aren't aware, we have done the elimination of reallocation for our 3 state grant programs. And you are now allowed to request funding up until August 1st, which allows you to go through the summer. As a committee, we talked about some impacts that could have currently reporting, because we don't currently have any reporting mechanism on FAAC that talks about summer as far as initial award, which is in our data element 57. We also need to kind of clarify any kind of eligibility, if there are any changes to eligibility, what that looks like for the satisfactory academic progress. And so as a committee, we still had some uncertainty, but we did go back, I did go back and start talking to other members of the staff to determine how could we best roll that out. So we do want to continue to roll out information about summer awarding, so you can offer summer funds for those 3 grant programs. We are going to work with the committee. We have a meeting set up on March 27th, and we're going to draft up some language before we send it out to the institutions so we can be very clear and concise on the guidelines on how you would do any awarding for the summer and what that would look like for those institutions who do choose to make summer awards. I mean, it is solely up to the institution to make that choice, but we highly encourage it if you can, and if you have the funding source still available in the summer to do so. So there will be more information to come, hopefully in the next several weeks, by next month, that we'll have something already rolled out to the institutions. But I want to make sure that before we roll it out, because we have had this happen in the past, that we send out information and we get lots of questions, then we have to turn around and send out like a clarification, then we have to send out like a clarification to the clarification. And so we want to eliminate a lot of back and forth and confusion. And I think the best way to do that is to really meet with our committee, already have what we consider the language that we want to send out, make sure someone from the institutions can read it for clarity, and then roll it out to everybody else. That way we have enough eyes on it other than just the coordinating board staff, because we don't have to administer how you're going to do it. We just have to ensure that you're using your funding. So we want to make sure that we give you enough guidance in order for you to make those fundings happen in the summer. And let's see, what else did we talk about? The last thing we talked about was our online loan reporting project that at the time we introduced for those institutions who actually were using the reports that were available through the HelmNet. There was a link that allowed you to do some school allocation reports and pull up information as far as who got dispersed aid, if there was uncertified applications. We had a lot of institutions who were using that. That link was available in February 2018. It was pulled down during that time for different security reasons, and it hasn't been brought back up. And so for those of you who've requested any reporting needs, you've had to use our online inquiry to send it to my team. They would have to upload a report into Move It, and that would be your way of actually receiving the report. And that's done on a daily basis, manually, of course, and it doesn't allow the flexibility of the administrators to actually go out and get their own reporting needs themselves. I just recently presented that project to try to get the online school reports back into production to our steering committee here, and it was approved. And so we're going to start working with our current vendor who does the HelmNet, the website that you might be very familiar with when you're doing certifications, to kind of write up scripts and to allow us to bring up those reporting needs again. So therefore, those administrators at the institutions who want to use the reporting can do so hopefully within the next year or so, because it is a lengthy process to kind of bring up those 8 reports. We're also requesting additional reports that we feel might be necessary and useful for the institutions. We are going to roll it out for everyone because I do know not all administrators at institutions actually utilize that reporting need, and we think it's very beneficial when you're looking at reconciliation during the financial aid database report time for cycle 2 and 3. So we want to get out more training and more instruction manuals about just how to administer the loan programs and what reporting needs are necessary to administer those loans that we have here. So I'm glad that we're able to provide that service to you all, and I know that will be very beneficial when it comes down to reconciliation for you guys. Did I cover everything, Samantha?
That's more than I had. I missed the online loan stuff.
Any questions or comments for Deshay or Samantha?
I will say again, we're meeting again on March 27th here at the coordinating board. So again, if you have any concerns or issues, let me know.
One of the things in the online reporting, and I don't think you mentioned it, so I apologize if I repeat, that we're looking into is trying to build into that the institutional requests that we've received for institutions to be able to pull down data on any Cal borrowing that a student has done, kind of like you can do with NSLDS to see any federal borrowing, as opposed to just at your institution, so that way you could have up-to-date information on what their overall debt level is for Cal, BUT, and TESP.
Yes, we do want to kind of roll in. I think this idea was introduced several FAAC meetings ago about trying to do maybe a state loan database, kind of similar to the award history tool that's out for the grant programs. And we want to roll that into this particular project as well. That way it gives you the accessibility to get that information a lot easier than you have, because right now you do not necessarily have it on hand. Another thing I want to add to the auto grant payment project is that we are also tying in our return of funds form, so that process is also going to be tied into that project as well. So not only can you request your money, but you can also return your money through the same application. So that I think is a benefit as well, not having to do duplicate forms, and you can watch how that process goes through.
I'd just like to say that I appreciate Samantha, and I see that this is one of the very valid reasons for having the FAAC. I think it's a beautiful thing of teamwork between the coordinating board, Deshay, and your team, and this team that's been set aside to do this very thing and to try to get everybody to agree. I know it's not been easy. I know it's a tough process to fight through, but I think we came out just slightly bruised, maybe, but still friends and speaking, and I think going forward we're going to be in good shape. So thanks for all your work, Samantha, and your team.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Item I.
Sorry.
Robert?
Okay, so for the task subcommittee, we met twice. First one is on
January 31st. That was basically to do introductions and go over the history of the TASFA. In addition, we also started thinking about ideas for feedback on what needs to be updated, or if anything need to be updated, or even if the TASFA was even relevant. The large majority consensus was that yes, it's needed. Most of us institutions represented there have about 400 to 600 students. I think even U of H had reported 1,500 students that feel that the TASFA. So we realized it was relevant, that we need the application. Some ideas for feedback that we discussed was to contact all the financial aid directors at all institutions across the state and ask a series of questions. We divided that among the committee, and we're reaching out to different financial aid directors. Another one was to do a survey during the TASFA regional training. So we talked about how to go about doing that, and we came to the conclusion that the best approach would be to have a quick survey that those participants can complete during lunch. So, five quick questions they can answer. This will give us more ideas of what needs to be updated, if anything needs to be updated. On the second meeting for February 27th, we continue following up on the feedback and started drafting the survey. Some of the feedback that we had collected so far comes down to institutions it comes down from students asking for a list of documents that most institutions use. So have a standardized list on the TASFA of documents most institutions collect. Like, for example, the tax return. If that's what all institutions collect, then that should be listed on the TASFA. In addition, adding the selected service statement, because we are still supposed to be collecting a selected service statement, even if they submit proof of eligibility. So we can accomplish this by adding it to the TASFA, at least for this population. The other one idea was that putting the statement of eligibility on the TASFA itself. So these are ideas that have come up so far. Our next meeting is scheduled for March 27. Our future goals are to continue gathering feedback and organize it all by the end of April. Our goal is to present our findings to this committee on our June meeting. Leah, did I leave anything out? Okay, thank you. Well, and I want to thank Leah because she has done a great job in helping us stay organized. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any questions? One item that I would suggest that you didn't know about when you started putting this together is in terms of your timeline, given that there are now 4 bills potentially requiring a TASFA, you might try to collect your information sooner rather than later if you want it to influence.
Okay, item J. Terry, did you have an update?
Actually, I have no recommendations other than let's just watch the legislature and see what happens.
Okay. And Delisa is not here, but I don't believe that she had any update at this point either for item K. So on to item L, annual nomination process. Chad?
All right, I just need to, I had my notes and then they disappeared on me. I apologize. Here we go. So first I wanted to clarify as to whose terms will be ending after the September meeting. So the September FAAC meeting will be the last meeting for the following individuals: Zelma, Delisa, Bridget. I had Robert, but now it isn't because you got elected and you're now here for another 3 years. So you got your vice, your chair, and your past chair. So Alan, Mike, and Kara. I probably should have said last names for the record, but I'll just put them in the minutes. So be aware, persons who have previously served on the committee are eligible to serve again. The handout, there's a handout that says Financial Aid Advisory Committee nomination membership process. It basically goes through it provides a nomination timeline that we will start in early April to launch the process, to collect information by the end of May. It's all set to make sure that we get board approval at the October meeting so that individuals can come. I just realized on this, it says first meeting for new members December, but this year it's November because we're doing our meeting early this year. But that's why we're starting early to make sure we hit that October deadline. And then below that, in the committee membership breakdown, we mentioned kind of how we go about trying to collect nominations. And so we will send out messages via our Gov delivery system to the presidents and chancellors of all Texas. Oh, this doesn't have everything in it. I apologize. It says Texas Independent Higher Education Institutions, but it's supposed to say all Texas higher education institutions. Financial aid directors will be copied on that. TASFA listserv notice will also be sent out to make sure that everybody knows the process that's going on. We don't have student nominations because those are only done every other year. For trying to get representatives from the school districts, we send an email to the Texas Association of Secondary School Principals and the Texas Association of School Administrators, asking them to distribute that to their membership to try to pull up nominations from school districts. And then TASFA lets us know directly. We receive a nomination from TASFA directly from the president letting us know who the member will be. One challenge we have every year is getting representatives from the school districts. So any recommendations that you have on whether there's additional places that we should be sending this information for distribution, we don't internally have anything that is a comprehensive list to send to. For financial aid, we can get out to the TASFA listserv, and then we also have our own internal list that people sign up for that has like 1,000 people on it that we let people know about stuff. But in terms of getting a school district representative, because we do have one person that will be coming off the committee, do you all have any recommendations on how to try to get the word out to independent school districts? Well, if you think of anything, please let me know, because that is a place where we have struggled. There's been years that we haven't had any representation from the independent school districts. So.
I was just curious, Terry, how did you find out? How did you find out about the committee? Did someone nominate you?
Eric called him, I think.
And it's...
Actually,
that was what happened.
Actually, I think it came down from several different people.
Oh, cool.
I would, communicate with the directors of counseling at each ISD. That's a good place to start. That's where I heard about it.
Do you know, is there a professional association, or how would I reach the directors of counseling? Because we don't have a list of directors of counseling.
Oh, probably through... I don't know. I know we have an organization, Texas Association of Counselors.
Texas Association of Counselors? Okay. Well, then I will see if I can reach out to in addition to secondary school principals and school administrators, I'll also reach out to the Texas Association of Counselors. I'll also reach out to our college readiness and success area to see if they have any kind of lists for when they are looking for nominations for Apply Texas. Maybe they have a list that we can come off of and try to go from that direction.
Okay.
Any other ideas, please drop me an email and let me know. Any questions or concerns about the timeline? Any confusion about, did I say your name and you didn't realize you were ending your term? Okay.
And Chad, you're up again for item N.
So one of the things that we've been looking at internally, I've been reading through the statute specifically related to the Center for Financial Aid Information. Section 61.0776 specifically requires the agency to have created a Center for Financial Aid Information. And we've done this through different mechanisms. Some of it is handled on the web through our College for All Texans website. Some of it is handled via the required toll-free telephone line that we have, the Texas Financial Aid Information Center. Some of it has training that's required, that we're required to provide, and for institutions of higher education, we're providing that through a myriad of different, usually partnerships with TASFA, through various different pieces there. But one of the things that in really looking through it as Deshay and I went line by line and kind of said to ourselves, okay, how are we meeting this requirement? How are we meeting this requirement? The piece that we realized that we don't have as well formulated is the piece that specifically requires that we shall develop a comprehensive financial aid training program for public school counselors. And it goes on to say that it should provide sufficient and accessible detail to enable the persons receiving the training to provide timely and consistent answers to the questions of students, their parents, conservators, or guardians, and that we should publicize the training and make the training easily available to public school counselors and other appropriate persons throughout the state. So we started looking at that, and a piece that we realized was, because at first I'm like, okay, do we have to create something since we seem to have a gap? But it would seem very duplicative for the agency to start creating something when Texas OnCourse has really created a lot of these materials. For those of you who have been on the committee for a couple of years ago, June Giddings came and presented to us on Texas OnCourse. And am I correct in saying that what you've developed was based on a statutory requirement that
Yes.
it gets
Yes, it
developed?
was
So it's
House
not
Bill
like
18.
a private product or something, it's a
Nope,
statutory.
it's free. It's available for all counselors and other educators as well across the state, and it was a result of House Bill 18 in 2015.
I believe it's good to use that mechanism. It's steady and it's going to be there. Unlike like on our TASFA, we've kind of had a drop off in our high school counselor things, and we're trying to bring that back now. And so it's getting good momentum, but I don't know. This would be more dependable than that. But I think it would be great for those workshops that do happen to advertise the fact that those things are available. And if the agency wanted to say, here's how we're doing it in multiple ways, is to provide slides or whatever for what you would want us to say, should we do a high school counselor workshop? This would be another check mark.
I just want to add, I really like the idea of the three-way communication,
Yeah, I agree.
between the programs, and just being able to offer, since this is digital, online, on demand, which I think is absolutely critical for high school counselors. Y'all are so tight on time and money that capacity, I think, would be critical, and just to add some more input into the process, because it is cyclical for TASFA, and I think it has to do with school budgets. So why can't we take advantage of something that works?
And there's so many changes coming down with financial aid that counselors need to be aware of what's coming up, especially the 135-hour thing.
And just to add a little bit more context, so you know how we make sure that all of the information in the Academy is up to date. We do have a content team that works with our content partners and just make sure that any changes that come through on any topic contained in the Academy, they are, the modules are updated on an annual basis, if not more. And we also do have fellowship programs. So we have about 50 counselors, advisors, and middle school teachers across the state who serve on a 2-year fellowship and can also serve as both in-person and virtual resources for their colleagues. So they often deliver for presentations and professional development. So just thinking of another way that we can leverage Texas OnCourse in that network to deliver this information. They'd be happy to help.
Oh, I think knowing that the high school counselors already utilize it, I think that's a big plus. But what if they have questions? Like, what is there kind of an interactive feedback or question and answer?
Yep, so we can, there are different kind of features of the Academy itself where they can interact with their colleagues. There's a chat function, a discussion board. They can contact us directly, and then they also have that connection to the Leader Fellows as well. So there's kind of a virtual network of experts that they can rely on, both, you know, Texas OnCourse staff and then also other counselors and advisors.
Second.
Second.
Seconded all over.
Everywhere.
Did any of what I just said, I had my mic off, didn't I? I didn't?
We could hear you.
Oh, but I don't know if it went into the recording. You don't think it did? Let me say it again for official so we get it down, that the agency will pursue a formal partnership with OnCourse and TASFA to identify how we can work together to best provide financial aid training for school counselors. That's what's going to go into the record as the motion.
And I make a motion.
I'll second.
Thanks, everyone.
We'd get to that portion of the video and it'd be blank.
All in favor? Aye. All in favor? All in favor?
Vote.
So,
All in favor?
aye.
Aye. And that looks like it's unanimous. Okay. Thank you all very much. Okay, item N, the update on student financial aid programs. Chad?
Okay. Just wanted to update you on some things that are going on. Let's see. Some recent updates to our resources. We did release back on January 30th, we released the 2019-20 award amounts for the Texas Grant and TEOG state grant programs. And then on February 4th, we released the TEG award amounts. Back on February 11th, we released the information, the announcement of the start of the 2018-19 FAD reporting cycle. So we're now accepting files. And then we also released an announcement letting everyone know that we are starting, and I say all these we's, this is really Deshay Leah and her team that are doing all of this. So that Financial Aid Services is going to be starting a monthly webcast for people to tune in to ask questions and get an update on recent events. There's a flyer about this posted under the Stay Connected section of the SFAP webpage. The first monthly webcast is March 12th at 2 p.m. Some upcoming activities. We will be participating in the TASFA regional training beginning in March. Wow, this is March, isn't it? And we'll also be hosting one of the trainings on April 10th here at the agency. We'll also be participating in the new Aid Officers Workshop in May 2019. Some deadlines to be aware of. If you participate in the Good Neighbor Scholarship Program, you'll want to make sure that you turn in your nomination forms by March 15th. And for the first round, for cycle 1 of FAD, keep in mind that you need to validate your cycle 1 data by April 15th. So that's later this year. I know that there was discussions to provide people with more time so that you weren't having things overlap of finishing off one FADs and starting another. So we wanted to give you more time. So we extended that out to April 15th. Some Upcoming items to look forward to. This month, I believe all of these are this month. Deshay will tell me if I'm wrong. But you will get your preliminary data to review for your grant program, whether it is Texas Grant, TEOG, or TEOG. You'll get your preliminary data for the allocation process so that you can review that to let us know whether any corrections are necessary. You'll also get information on the summer awarding process, and also some preliminary information will be coming out about the auto grant payment process to make sure that everyone is aware that it is not nearly as complicated as how I described it at TASFA in October. So I'm sure there are lovely dartboards with my name on it somewhere. So, and then some loan updates to be aware of. Effective January 31st, we moved into production our online ACH request form, so borrowers don't need to fill out paper and send that to us anymore. They can do that online, and that comes with a discount interest rate reduction of 0.25 percentage points if they choose to participate in ongoing ACH. We did, in fact, take the paper-based form off of the HH Loans websites because people were just printing that out and sending it in instead of using the new nifty system that makes it happen easily for everyone. We are looking that by the end of March, we're going to be putting into production some improvements to the display and communication of information on HH loans for students so that they can better understand their loans. The TASP nomination period opens April 15th, so that elected officials can begin nominating individuals for TASP for the coming year. The nomination period closes July 15th? 31st. It closes July 31st, so we're giving them a big, long window to do their nominations, since they probably won't be thinking about it during the session, but some have already been contacting us, so we want to make sure that it's ready. I mentioned this in a previous meeting that we will be implementing a credit card processing fee. I wasn't sure if it was administrative or processing. So a credit card processing fee, that's going to be implemented April 26, 2019. As I mentioned in the prior meeting, we are implementing the fee so that the cost of that is borne by individuals who actually use that option as opposed to being spread out across all borrowers in the program. And then for CAL applications received on or after May 1st, the CAL interest rate will be reduced from 5.3 to 5.2%. We had a favorable bond offering, and so we want to pass on whatever savings we can to students. So that is for any CAL applications received on or after May 1st. Any questions about the updates? Ellen, you look like you want to ask a question.
I just had one, question. Had gotten something back a few weeks ago about a chat bot that the coordinating board is initiating and a contact person at the university, for financial aid, for admissions, for everything else. Do you have any information about that initiative?
I don't. Deshay, have you gotten any information on that from the conversations? The reason that I don't have any information, that is actually being led up by our college readiness and success area. But I know that Deshay has been working with them because they are also leading our effort to update College for All Texans and bring both the admissions and the financial aid information up to date. So Deshay has been working with them on that. I don't know if you have any more details about it.
I don't have any additional details in what you just mentioned other than I know it's something to allow students to actually communicate and get questions and answers on after 5 o'clock as well, because obviously most of the students are up at 8, 9, 10, midnight, asking different questions, because that's when they're actually online looking to pursue their education. So that's the particular reason why the chat box was created. And so that's about as much as I know about that chat box. I know Dakota Doman and Aaron Willing are part of that team that had pulled that together. And so from our college readiness and success, but I can try to get out more information to provide to FAAC.
Well, and I was going to say, what I'll do is I'll make sure that they come to
Yeah.
the next Financial Aid Advisory Committee meeting so that they can provide an update on the whole chatbot process.
Yeah, just kind of, I mean, I know a lot of schools, Angelo State being one of them, has entered into that world just in the last month. And so wondering kind of how even these bots might communicate together or how they might coordinate together, but even just where it's going to reside and live. Is it going to be on the College for All Texans site? And, you know, then will it be other places where then the student would start engaging? And I mean, interesting to see what it does. And then ultimately, you know, what comes back to the universities is we are that default. If you want more information, here's who you contact, which I mean, I think is great to connect us to folks who are asking questions, but just awareness of kind of what it is and where it's at would be helpful.
When I send out the update after this meeting, I'll include the name and contact information of whoever the best people in CRS, in College Readiness and Success, College Readiness and Success are for you to be in touch with.
Any other comments or conversation from everyone? Okay.
Chad's, you described one of the bills, and we never got back to it. Can you just quickly give a 2-second blip on the emergency grant program? Is that what you called it, emergency?
Yes, I can. Let me just pull it up real quick to give you a 2-second blurb on it. It's not one that I'm as familiar with as others, but it did. The agency had received a Gates grant, and so from that, we had a 2-year process, and I think you were on it. I'm trying to type and talk at the same time. Out of that process, one of the things was a recommendation for an emergency aid program to be administered here at the agency. And it is called the Texas Emergency Aid for Public Post-Secondary Students Grant Program. And let me just call that up real quick. So that is bill number SB 884 by Senator Menendez. And basically, it is to provide. Sorry about that. It would be through the THECB, but we would be providing block grants to the institutions for institutions to be making their determinations. So it's not a centralized program. It's decentralized like all of our other programs. And the purpose of the program is to prevent that loss of momentum towards completion. And so based on funding provided, we would allocate funds to qualifying 2-year and 4-year public institutions. And it would require institutions, there's some specific things that institutions would need to do. They would have to provide matching funds of at least 10% of the grant amount. They would have to have clear information adopted as to what constitutes an emergency in the process. They would have to be able to turn around emergency grant requests from students within a certain time frame, as well as partner with state and nonprofit agencies and organizations to offer wraparound services that would support students. So there's various requirements to participate in the program, as well as requirements as to what could be awarded. Currently, there's a cap not to exceed $1,000 per award. that you have to be able to apply electronically, offered in both English and Spanish, 48-hour turnaround after receipt to make a decision, and then another 48 hours to provide the funding, et cetera. So I'd encourage you to take a look at SB 884 in order to see kind of what came out of the emergency aid network in terms of a formal statutory response to that group.
Chad, if I remember correctly, that's the bill that has a limit of 50,000. Is that, I don't know.
Yeah, like per school.
Per school?
Yes,
per
currently
institution?
it does. The amount of grant awarded to an institution per academic year would be a maximum of $50,000.
So that means that 10%, I guess schools would only be required to match up to the 10% of the 50,000.
So another 5,000 on top of
Another-
that.
Just 5,000, okay.
Yep.
Sounds good, thank you.
Thanks again.
Any other bills I can give you a quick update on?
Okay.
Okay.
I think then at this point, we're ready for adjournment. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Okay, second? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Thank you all very much. We'll see you in June.
Yes, you will. And you'll hear from me sooner.
And one other thing I meant to say, do not forget your forms. And
Just want to let you all know that I already have an email from someone from an ISD asking when it would be possible to get a copy of the nomination form. This rocks.
Can I ask another question, John? Or do all areas, like we have a regional office in El Paso for all the ISDs. Do all the other areas in the state have those?
I don't know. I'm not as knowledgeable about ISDs as I am about
Because that's what I was going to recommend to you, but I don't know if that's a statewide